If you want to be a validator on the Ethereum network, it is essential to know which client providers suit you the best to run a node. We want to help users make an informed decision, thus presenting the Know Your Client series to learn about Ethereum's EL and CL clients and what they have to offer after the merge. Welcome to the merge special PEEPanEIP episode 78. I'm Pooja Ranjan, and with me are talented Ethereum developers Potuz and Terence to talk about the Prysm client. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for having us.
A quick introduction to the client. Prysm is a Go implementation of Ethereum protocol for consensus layer, aka beacon chain. As per the official documentation, Prysm contains a full beacon node implementation, as well as a validator client for participating in blockchain consensus. Terence has been on our show earlier to talk about Prysm at the time of Altair, the first beacon chain upgrade. And this is the first time we have Potuz with us. So welcome you both. And before we get into client's detail, let's have a quick introduction for our listeners.
Sure, I guess I can go first. Hi, my name is Terence. I am a core dev at PEEPanEIP Labs. I have been around the space since early 2019. So what got me into it was I was reading this Reddit post by Vitalik about wanting people to work on scalability. And then on the same Reddit thread, I found Rahul and Preston. They're also looking to do the same thing. And that's how I got started, basically. So I first started just working on sharding. And that actually didn't go anywhere because we're trying to do sharding through the smart contract and that wasn't going to work. And at the same time, there was this Casper by Danny Ryan, and then it was like ZIP 1011 or something. And instead of doing like proof of stake on like a smart contract, they ended up going to do proof of stake on a new blockchain, and that's what the beacon chain is today. So that's how I got started, just working on those like cool R&D initiatives. So yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So hi, I'm an outsider actually to this community. I'm a professional mathematician. I just had some times during the pandemic. I guess I entered this community more or less in 2020. I've had just read about Ethereum. I wanted to learn more. I got excited about the merge and the idea of proof of stake. So that was a good way of saying, well, I'm just going to be locked on this. I bought some ETH. I immediately put it in a contract. I bought some ETH at the time of the Medallia incident. And I started to read. I started to learn how it worked. I just entered this community through the e-staker community, as many of the validators have. And well, so I chose Prysm as my client. So I entered their Discord, started seeing that I wanted some functionality in the client that they didn't have. For example, I don't know, some login functionalities for Linux. So I started opening some PRs. Then I started to get interested in the specs, in the specifications. I've learned a lot from some members of the community. And it's a very welcoming community if you want to learn. People like even down from anyone that is in charge of the spec. I just don't want to drop names, but everyone as high as you can go, they're going to be very welcoming and open to answer questions and engage in discussions. And well, so that got me here. Essentially, I started bothering more until these guys lured me in.
That is awesome. Thank you for the introduction. And now you are a part of core contributors. So this is very interesting for new people who would be willing to join the Ethereum community. I hope your story inspires them. Well, I understand we have got some presentation. So without further ado, let's just peep in.
All right, so I can start. So hi guys, so like we did an intro already, so it's really excited to be here. And I think last time was like the Altair upgrade. So it's been a minute. Okay, so yeah, so today Potuz and I are here. We're going to chat about the merge, especially what does the merge look like for Prysm, right? So as for the agenda, I'll briefly go over the client and then I'll go over like our next big release, which is V3. What are the high-level features out there? And I will go over some testing updates as well. And Potuz will take care of the second half. He will go over the detailed features, and then he will also tell his favorite story, which is like what happened a couple of weeks ago when there was like a 7-block reorg. So yeah, so let's get started. So Prysm, that's why we're here. And Prysm is one of the 5 production CL implementation out there today. It's written in Go. And I do want to emphasize like Prysm written in Go, and that's why like there are certain like features that exist in Prysm, it doesn't exist in other client, which that you as a user, as a developer, you may be interested in. And the features such as gRPC and such as we also use Bazel as well. And then Prysm is also nice in a way that we do have this like pretty natural interoperability with execution client, in particular Get. And that's something that I will also go more in depth in. But yeah, so this is Prysm. And before I start like talking about Prysm, right, I do want to like mention client diversity because it's a very big thing. As a Ethereum core dev, that's essentially what I do really care about. I'm really passionate about. The client diversity has gotten much, much better since earlier the year. Prysm is roughly at 40% now. So it's less than 50%, so that's good. And then the execution client obviously needs a lot more work, and that's definitely something that as a community we should probably pay more attention to in the next following months. But yeah, so I'm really happy with the client diversity right now, and I also do want to encourage more people trying out minority client and see if there's like features that you like there, features you don't like there, and then bringing in feedbacks across client, right? That's very important because like it's all about like being on the same level across all the clients. Something that you like on one client A, you also want to implement it in client B, you should definitely like open the issues and talk to developers. And most people are really, really happy to like talk to you about it, right? I also want to like mention like, just to be cautious, right? It's like, it's okay to try every client combos on the test net. But when it comes to mainnet, if you're staking real validators with real money, you should do whatever is most comfortable for you, right? I probably wouldn't try some other client combos that I don't know as of today. So definitely play around in the test net, but for mainnet, be very, very careful with what you do. And so every client has its own like strength and its own weakness, right? So this blog post by Michael Labs released a couple of weeks ago is a good one as well. So I'm just quoting what they're saying. Basically, they're saying, hey, Prysm has pretty good UX. So I'm really happy to hear that. It's because like UX always has been in our heart for the last couple of years. We want to be the client that has good UX. But also Prysm some downside, right? For example, we implement HTTP server on top of our gRPC server, so the response time may be slow there, and it may not be ideal. That's something that we're working towards as well. But yeah, I highly encourage everyone to read the post and then just see the trade-off between clients, and then yeah. So let's just talk about like something that's more like Prysm specific. And then one thing about Prysm specific that you don't see on other clients is that we're heavy users of Protobuf and gRPC, right? And then we often get like, why are we doing this? Why don't we just do like a standard like API REST approach, right? So like, I must admit, like I'm kind of like a gRPC maximalist, so like I might be biased towards gRPC, right? But like I like gRPC because like I think in technology, right, things tend to go in circles between like strongly type communication approach and weakly type communication approach, right? I think like for me, it's like when two machines are communicating with each other, right? There should be like a very clear contract with strong types on like on just like on what those machines are talking about. And gRPC is basically that, right? You define the contract and then you auto-generate the client and the server code. So any changes can be propagated very quickly as possible without human trying to parse like documentation and understand how to write the code, right? So in summary, like gRPC give you this spec that's actually used for generating client and server code. And then it's also a spec that provide like forward and backward compatibility changes. It has a more like structured metadata pattern. And then it also has better connection primitive. For example, bidirectional streaming and concurrent requests over a single direction. It's very, very nice for on gRPC stuff, right? And that's why like we are using gRPC, like a lot of like cloud instrumentation companies like Kubernetes, Dockers, they all use like Golang and they all use gRPC. And that's why like we are using it and that's why we love it. And that's definitely, I think, something that we're really, really proud of, right? And then with that said, right, we do have like 2 different APIs because like I think when we first started like implementing our own like API, like there was no official API yet, just like we're slightly like ahead of like the time. So we have our like Prysm gRPC API, which like some people uses. But at the same time, we also using the standard JSON API that's defined on the E2 API repo, because we do understand that standardization is very, very important. You do kind of like you want like someone to be able to use multiple clients using the same API. So then another thing that's very, very Prysm specific is that we use Bazel, right? And then we also get that a lot. So why are you guys using Bazel? Why don't you use like Makefile, right? So we use Bazel just Bazel provides this reproducible build and the sandbox environment that ensures that everyone that's building Bazel has exactly the same experience, right? And that's very important. For example, like my friend may be like building our Beacon client on their own like OS, on their own machine language system, and then I'm doing it on my own system. So there may not be some sort of like reproducible between us, right? So Bazel enables that. And then, so which is nicer, say today you have a bug introduced, right? As the developer environment being different than others. So we don't have that, we don't have to worry about bug being introduced because of like developer environment being shipped different than the user. And then we also don't have to worry about a messy dependency management when dealing with a mono repo with multiple programming language. Bazel also solves that. And then at the same time, Bazel also has remote caching, which is very, very nice to run a CI and test in like a massive code base. And then it also has advanced features such as like dependency analysis. You can query like dependency graph and stuff. And that's why we are using Bazel as of today. And we also have our like Bazel version of go-ethereum. So we fork go-ethereum, we turn that into a Bazel repo. That's very nice because that allows us to use Go bindings in a way. So it makes like our code base a lot cleaner, a lot less duplicated code because of this. Right. So let me just quickly jump into what shift gear, talk about what Prysm v3 is, right? So we're gonna launch Prysm v3 at some point before the merge. And what is v3? So v3, so personally, I like this. I like major release because major release is, we can say it's now backward compatible. So you can like introduce breaking changes. And to me, that's nice because that's like the perfect time to do cleanup, right? You can clean up all like the things that you don't like in the code base. So what is v3? So v3, we of course we're gonna have Bellatrix and the merge support. And then we're gonna have support for map boost because sounds like timeline-wise, that's what everyone will be ready for. And it's also important for all the clients to have map boost support at the same time. So therefore, you don't create this network asymmetry where like everyone will use the client that basically builds more profitable block, right? And then something that Raul has been working tirelessly on is trying. We do want to like have better separation of header and payload. Because currently it's kind of silly that you're storing payload on 2 different places, which Potuz will go more in depth on later. And then we also want to deprecate all the like outdated flags and APIs and things that people don't really use, but we cannot delete that today just because it's not backwards compatible, right? And then we're gonna clean up our code base to make it more idiomatic, better UX, better logging, monitoring, and just really happy that we get to use this ability to basically make our code base much better. Then let's talk about testing. That's the fun stuff, right? So I think we mentioned this. Oops, sorry. I think we mentioned this in previous update as well, that we have our end-to-end test. This end-to-end test is more Prysm specific. That's how we implement in-house. So we launch local beacon nodes, client, validator clients, attestation clients, and slashers, right? And we recently, kudos to Nishan, we recently added live client support. So it's kind of multi-client right now. We're able to catch bugs, not only on Prysm, but also like sometimes on Lighthouse. And then we get to alert Lighthouse, hey, you guys have this issue, and I think they're usually pretty happy when we do that. And then this is triggered before like PR gets merged into develop branch. And then how it works is we have this evaluator at every epoch. We basically monitor matrix, API logs, and then make sure like they pass certain threshold, otherwise we fail the test. So this is essentially, besides unit test is probably layer 0. So I would say this is like the first layer that we find bugs, and then it has caught us so many bugs before, and we're really appreciated for that, right? And then there's also the Hive test. So the Hive test is coordinated by EF, by Perry, and by Mar, and then by Mar, Real, and all those gentlemen. And then this Hive test is, I would say, similar to Prysm into E, but it's more like engine API focused. So it doesn't really test scenario with like slashing, like deposit, exit. So it tests more like client, consensus client and execute client and their interactions between each other. So it's very important. It's very useful. But it's more engine API focused, and I'm really happy that we have those in place. So Hive test definitely deserve a shout out, right? And then testing, of course, the existing client, right? We did all the Amphira, we did the we did all the private testnet before, and then we did Robson, and today's the polymerge. So we're like knocking out the door for every single one, right? And the next one's gonna be Goerli, then the mainnet. So this is literally like probably the best, like this is the best playground for testing, right? Today we found like certain exchanges pools did not use the right config, right? And because of that, like there are definitely some hiccups, but that's what testnet is for, to find situation issues like this. So this is how we can improve as a community. And there's also the Shadowforge. Shadowforge is very underrated in my opinion, because it allows us to test what the mainnet merge will be like without actually merging it. And then we have done like so many of those. And then I would say personally, I'm like really impressed, because I feel like before from the start, we're barely working, but now we're working flawlessly. So we can see that all the improvements throughout the time frame. And yeah, Shadowforge is great, right? And then there's other type of testing such as fuzzing, which we definitely, so shout out to Lighthouse guys. They are the ones that's been doing this differential fuzzing between all the clients to make sure that when something failed, it failed the same way. And then we have gotten a few ping about that, and we definitely face a few issues, right? And there's a stress testing, performance testing, kurtosis, menu testing, and there's just a lot of testing that goes inside. So what do we need more testing of, right? So I do think now with map boost, we need more testing around map boost. Ideally, I would love to incorporate map boost inside Hive or inside our end-to-end, which we'll work on very soon. That's very important to make sure that map boost reply correctly, and in the event if it doesn't reply correctly, you default that to the local EE, right? And then I would love to see more testing of reorgs, for example, what happens under certain reorg conditions, and then fix all the proposal boost related issues that happened before. And then love to see more testing on API throughput. For example, like I recognize it for Prysm, certain API response are much slower, and then there's always like things you can improve there. So that's definitely very underrated area to test. And then P2P analysis and just like typical throughput analysis, right? So like what does the chain look like when we shift from 12-second block time to 13-second block time to 12-second block time? And what does it look like once you have skip slot? It's definitely something that we probably need more analysis of. And also the guess limit. What happens now? The validator can actually set their own guess limit. That's something that's very interesting that we probably should think of more as a community. So what we should spend more time on, I think UX is probably the most important thing, right? Like today, we saw issues because of config, right? And then like this is gonna happen, probably gonna happen when mainnet comes. Just like the less configuration we have to set, the better. And unfortunately, today we have to run 2 pieces of software and maybe more if you wanna extract MEV. How do we make the UX better to avoid like issues with like different config mismatch on the field? And then we probably want to look at like what the disk size looks like between different client combos. And then I think that's something that's very important. And documentations and toolings, those come a long way. So what's left before the merge? Very high level, right? We definitely want to harden MapBoost support and the documentation to make sure it's solid. People once you use MapBoost can use MapBoost like comfortably. We want to store header instead of the payload. That's what we're always been working on. We want to remove all the redundant if1 endpoint support. Because right now we can like users can pass like multiple if1 endpoint, and then that's probably not gonna work too well post merge. So that's something that we should probably remove, and just more testing and more UX improvement. So yeah, that's it. That's what I have. So I'm gonna pass the ball to Potuz.
So thank you. So I think I'll be very brief, and I'll just focus on things that that really just matter to our users, to our current users, and some features of our clients that are changing. One of them is that currently you have been communicating your beacon node with your execution client. They need to communicate because the beacon node needs to know about deposits. So when you propose a block, you need to have some information about deposits. This is not so essential, and that's why people can divert this need to places like Infura or Alchemy or some providers. After the merge, this is not the case. You are going to be required to run an execution client, and this is why it's great that we are going to be onboarding a lot of new execution nodes into the network. So that's why client diversity, we are hoping that it's going to change on the execution side. But apart from like improving client diversity, one of the things that's going to come with the merge and the need to run an execution client is the fact that it's going to be more dangerous. If someone grabs your execution client, they can actually steal they can steal your map, they can steal your earnings, they can steal your transaction fees. So in order to prevent this from happening, if you're running your execution client over HTTP, you are going to require to have an authenticated connection, and that the system chosen is JWT. The communications, well, they just need to be secured. That's why they were chosen. Unfortunately, the UX is not good. It's not great. You're not going to be allowed to just pass a password. You're going to have to pass a 32-byte encoded string as a hex string. So this is going to be a bunch of characters that you need to put into a file, into just a text file. And this string needs to be passed to both your beacon node and your execution client. In the case of Prysm, you're going to pass this flag, which is this JW secret merge there, just to the location of that file. And what the flag is going to be in the case of your execution client, well, that depends on the execution client. I just put there the flags for Nethermind. If you haven't tried Nethermind, try it. It's great. It's working fine. It's ready for the merge, and it's not get, which is a great client get, but we need clients that are not get, and Nethermind is a great option. So is Bazel, by the way. I mean, there's plenty of clients that are ready for the merge. All right. Other feature that most users will be interested is this suggested Fee Recipient. This is the Ethereum address, the current execution Ethereum address where your earnings are going to go, not the validator earnings, but the transaction fees. This is a fee that currently miners are taking, and that after the merge, it's going to start going to validators. Validators will get access to those fees immediately. As soon as they propose a block, they are going to get those transaction fees into whatever address they put in their configuration files or in the configuration flags. We have been getting really weird questions regarding this suggested fee. This is not an address that needs to be tied up with your validator in any way. This is not an address that you need to own. You do not need to have the private address, the private key for this address. If you want to donate your fees, you can just put vitalik.eth. Probably Vitalik doesn't really need that much either, but you can put whatever you want. You don't need to own that address. What else can I tell you about this? There are several ways of setting that address. Different users will have a different needs. Say a small staker like myself, I'm just going to use this on the. I would like to use it on the beacon node. Unfortunately, you need to pass this on the beacon on the validator client. So on the validator client, there's this client flag, which is suggested Fee Recipient, and you just put whatever address you want there to send all of your fees for any validator that proposes. Some other validators that have more validators, for example, they just don't want to show to the network that they have plenty of validators. They're going to be using a JSON file where they're going to just assign different addresses for each validator, for example, and a default one for all of them that they weren't assigned a particular address. And even more advanced validators, they would want to have a server that is going to be sending post messages with a changing address whenever they negotiate, for example, where the fees are going to be going. So those three different ways, there are different ways. Take a look at the documentation, which one is for you. If you don't put anything, these fees are going to be burned. And there's been internal discussions as to what is the burn address. I had a PR open to send everything to Potuz.eth, but it was banned and it was not approved. They didn't even review it. So I think we're using a burn address. We're using 0 hash as the burn address. If you don't put a configuration flag, you are going to lose all of your fees. Okay, so the next item I wanted to talk a little bit is something that already Terence covered. This is storing blind blocks. This is one of the unfortunate features of the merge. The way the merge works, I don't want to get into technical details, but we are now broadcasting beacon blocks. We're broadcasting consensus blocks on the consensus layer and execution blocks on the execution layer, and they are completely unrelated except for one intersection, which is the information about deposits. After the merge, the full block containing transactions and everything is going to be broadcasted in the consensus layer. The consensus client, in this case is Prysm, is going to send to the execution client the execution payload that contains all the transactions. The unfortunate feature of this is that both the consensus client and the execution client need to have access to the full set of transactions, to the full block of execution, because they both need to broadcast it internally from the execution side because of the way they sync, and the consensus layer because, well, that's what we need to validate. We need to validate the full block. This turns out that it's going to carry an extra 260 gigabytes at the current usage, and we expect this to be actually larger after the merge per year in just data that shouldn't be stored because it's in two different pieces of software. Both the execution layer and the consensus layer is going to store this. So we're moving fast. Actually, this Raul from our team just took over this responsibility, and he has a working PR. He's already been syncing testnets, only storing the consensus part of the block. And of course, this carries the problem of like having to assemble back the block if someone asks you for the full block. Now, if you're just a user, why would you care about this? You probably don't, except the fact that your hard drive is going to be less full. But there's tons of connections about this and PBS, a proposer build separation, and the way people are going to extract MEV. the way most validators are going to want to run their nodes to get more money, to earn more money, to earn more transaction fees, is by not preparing the execution part of the block themselves, but outsourcing this to another builder. And to do this, you need to send this blind block that doesn't contain this execution payload itself. So it's useful to have this separation, and to the consensus layer, the natural object that the consensus layer is going to have to work with is this blind block. So here's another thing. So this is our contribution to client diversity without switching clients. We have a completely independent port choice implementation that has essentially nothing to do with the port choice implementation that Prysm has by default today. You can run this port choice implementation by using that fee. That is the second one there. It has been tested for the last 4 months. We have never had a consensus failure between Prysm and between Prysm and Lighthouse, and between Prysm now in the last few months, between Prysm and anything following with that, using that port choice. It's much less bug prone than the default port choice. That's why we designed it, because it's much easier to read the code in this implementation. And we're hoping that this implementation will be default soon. So that's one feature that you may want to test. You may want to give it a spin. And as I said, this is a way, if you're just too lazy to choose a different client, this is a way to add a little bit of client diversity to the mix. This is perhaps the reason why I'm here. I'm actually personally proud for this. This is a feature that we stole from different clients. This is something that happened, a technical detail that happens in Bitcoin. It's the way they hash their blocks. They hash Merkle trees. They realized that they're hashing blocks of a constant size, which is 64 bytes. And all of the SHA implementations, all of the hashing implementations out there are optimized to hash large buffers, not just 64 bytes, but length buffers. So we just stole that from Bitcoin. We just took that and used the optimization of knowing that we're hashing a lot of the times 64 bytes. And we also stole some, I'm saying stealing, but just mixed code of Intel that uses parallelization when you're hashing several things at the same time. And these two things are very impressive. They're having very impressive results in the way we're hashing, which is one of the most expensive things that a consensus node does now. We're seeing up to 10 times or 12 times faster on newer machines than the regular hashing. This is a very optimal setting. This is hashing like very large lists, which is not the case regularly, but still we're seeing like twice. We're syncing twice faster by just turning on that flag. So that flag, enable vectorized SHA, is a flag that is potentially dangerous because it's a new hashing library in assembly, which is developers are usually scared of these things, but we've been fuzzing that library. The Ethereum Foundation has been fuzzing that library. The personal people have been fuzzing that library without any problems. So we're very happy about this. All right. So here's the last thing I wanted to say. One of the items was to tell a story, a success, or, well, not so much of a success story. And this is a little story that I don't want to give technical details. I just want to say how being just a little optimistic and not really looking into the details brought us a problem and perhaps an advertisement problem of having a deep 8 fork on the network. So the reason this happened is because of a feature. This feature is easy to explain at a high level. It's called Proposer Boost, and is a feature that would allow a node, when it sees a block arriving early, say, oh, this node is much better than any other one that I have now. So if you need to choose between two blocks and you saw one that was exactly on time, it was fast, it came to you fast, and you have another one that should have come to you 12 seconds ago and it just appeared, you're going to vote for the node that you just have now. So this feature was coordinated among every client. It was deemed that it was fine to just ship it in whenever we wanted. And for the most part, it was. It was just a combination of another feature. And this other feature is a feature that said, before you propose a block, just before you do anything for proposing a block, just check again if you've seen new attestations. Check again if your head has changed. And as soon as you do this, propose your block. So these two features were going to be shipped at the same times. Essentially, no client got the second one on time. Prysm had a release just right before that, at that time. So we managed to ship it in. But I think Prysm was the only client that was shipping that. And half of the nodes were updated. And this half is the key. We got very, very unlucky that half of the people updated. If no people had updated it, or if all people had updated it, we would have been fine. But just half of the people updated the node, and this created this sort of like conditions where it wasn't really clear which block to vote on. So some nodes that weren't updated were proposing for in the wrong chain, but the other block could still be had. The fun fact is that Prysm was the only client that had shipped the new feature. So if any proposer was a Prysm node, this wouldn't have happened. Not because Prysm is great, it's just because Prysm happened to have these two features together. And so when I looked at this, I got the alert. We're having a huge fork. What the hell happened? I went. I looked at the blogs and I said, well, this happened, but I don't believe this because this must be an attack. Because if any Prysm node is there, this fork is impossible. And I just computed quickly the probabilities, and this is something that we get confused all the time. Yeah, this is not so probable. It's only 1 in 5,000 times that this is going to happen. If you have a fork, that you're going to get eight nodes in a row that satisfy these properties of like not being Prysm, of not being updated, and whatever it is. But the problem is that we have a lot of slots. We have one slot every 12 seconds. So 1 in 5,000 is going to happen every couple of days. So yeah, this is a situation that happened. It's unfortunate. And now we are about to ship new properties. And we're very mindful among all clients of talking, is it safe? Are we going to do it or not? We've learned a lot of that with that event. Okay, so let's just stop right there.
I think that's all the slides that we have. So yeah, open to questions or any feedbacks, concerns.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all these details. It is really interesting to see insight of how client development is going on. And about the last slide, the story that Potuz shared about the bad coordination or the proposed boost story. Would you mind sharing which particular incidents it was?
I'm sorry, so could you just repeat the question?
So I was wondering which incident it was. Was it for any particular testnet or
oh no, so this was in mainnet. It was a few weeks ago. It was an 8 deep block fork that sort of like yeah, it's been raving on Twitter as something like the merge killer, but it was just an unfortunate series of events of people carelessly upgrading their nodes and hours carelessly shipping updates without like coordinating it.
Well, like when there is not so good experience, that is always a lesson learned, which is ultimately good for users. So definitely we are happy that situation is under control. Thank you for sharing that story. I have a few questions which we have collected from the community. I can probably take some of them. The first one is around the basic understanding. I understand the terms that we use in day-to-day basis may be very easy and simple for developers and many technical people, but there are many users who are maybe willing to become a validator in future. It would be useful for them. So what is the main difference between justified and finalized block slots, epochs?
Okay, so the way the protocol works is that, I mean, at a first approximation is this. You would say a finalized block, it's never going to be non-canonical. A finalized block, it's never going to be reverted. A justified block is very unlikely to be reverted. The technical, so that's the first approximation. That's not true for either one. A finalized block might be reverted, but to revert a finalized block, it would require a lot of people losing all of their ETH. Like 2/3 of the validator set will lose everything they have if you want to change a finalized block. We do not want to find ourselves in a situation where we need to revert a finalized block, because that would mean that 2/3 of the validator set would lose all of their money. Now, technically, what is the difference? When 2/3 of the validators vote for a block, they vote, well, yeah, I'm just gonna simplify it in a block. When 2/3 of the validators vote for a block, that block is called justified. If it just so happens that 2/3 of the validators vote for the child of that block, then, well, the child becomes justified, and then the parent becomes finalized. And the algorithm we follow for fork choice guarantees that we're not going to ever change a finalized block. And the only way of changing a justified block for something, say a contending block, so to revert a justified block, would be if there was a network partition and a large chunk of validators went offline and suddenly appeared. Say China's wall, China's firewall just blocks a lot of validators from China, and then they suddenly open it. We see a long chain. Okay, we might revert up to the justified point, but we're never going to revert the finalized point.
That make a lot of sense. So another follow-up on that, like just like we have 12-second slots, do we have a certain fixed time? Is there any like fixed time from a slot being justified to finalized?
Oh, no. So not at all. However, when the network is behaving correctly, what's going to happen is that every 32 slots, you're going to justify a new you're going to justify a new block, and you're going to finalize your previous justified block. So if there are no forks going on, if the network is well behaved, and I'll remind you, this has happened in mainnet since its launch. It's never behaved in a different way. Since its launch, every 6.4 or 6.4, whatever, 32 times 12 seconds. So this is about a little bit more than 6 minutes. We justify a new block, and the previous justified block becomes final. And this has never changed since the beginning of the beacon chain.
That is good to know.
I will also add on top of that, right? I think most of the viewers may be familiar with Tendermint, for example. So any sort of BFT chains, they kind of favor safety over liveness. They have this concept of a single run, right? So what happens in the single run is that block proposal propose, and then validator does pre-commit and also commit. So there's basically 2 runs of vote, right? And then in our case, our first run of vote is kind of like justification. The second round of vote is basically finalization, basically, right? And then instead of like doing this every single slot, we do it every single epoch. So therefore, we favor liveness over safety, and that's basically the trade-off that we favor.
Interesting, and thank you so much for sharing. I know these are basics, but it's helpful for new users. Talking about new users, I understand this beacon chain and the POS version will be mostly about validators. So I heard about validators set when it comes to testnet. Sometimes it is permission and sometimes it is open. Sepolia, the merge that happened today, and the Goerli that we are expecting in few days. So could you maybe talk about what are permission and open validators set for testnets, and why do we have it the way it is?
Yeah, I can take this one. So post-merge, there's going to be 2 main testnet. They will be long running and they will be kept alive. So the first one is Sepolia. The second one is Goerli, or you can say Prater as well. That's the consensus layer side. So the Sepolia is the permission testnet. By permission, I mean that not everyone can join, but you can join if you submit a request. So we basically want people that sign up for it, they know what they're doing, and they can like sort of verbally promise that they will do their job nicely and not just give up on their validator after like a few weeks, right? And then why does it matter? I think it matters to have this very like smooth running beacon chain or a consensus layer chain or the merge, whatever, that people can test their dApps on. So this is basically the solid test run, right? And then on the other spectrum, you have Goerli, which is more free, that anyone can join, anyone can leave. And that will be slightly more bumpier, but it's also important to test your dApps on that as well, just to make sure like at the worst case scenario that your dApp still survive basically. So yeah, so there's basically like different end of the spectrum, and then it's highly encourage people to test both.
That is good. We understand that both of these are public test nets and those should be open for dApp testing and other purposes, but having it permission and open gives flexibility to developers to maybe test it the way it should be. So that's good to know. Talking a bit more about validators and their questions, concerns, maybe sometimes, and mostly it is related to the slashing, right? And losing up the deposit. So what does it mean about a validator missing proposing? Like, will that affect a validator if running a single client node?
So about the validators missing a proposal? Well, because I mean, you mentioned slashing and missing a proposal. This, I'd say one thing about slashing: just don't run two validators, and that's it. You're not going to be slashed if you just don't run two validators. If you don't run two clients, you're not going to be slashed. Period. There hasn't been any other kind of slashing. Everyone that has been slashed is because they try to be fancy. They try to like not lose time, not be offline, and they try to do this in a clever way. And they were not as clever as I thought. So don't run two validator clients, you're not going to be slashed. Now, regarding missing a proposal. Okay, so if you are a very large staker, you will miss proposals eventually. Unfortunately, the network has some hiccups. And if you run like thousands of validators, you may lose one or the other one. And it's not so bad. If you're a small staker like myself, like I propose one block every 2 months or 3 months. If I lose a proposal, I cry a little bit. And so far, it hasn't happened to me, luckily. It would be a concern. If you don't propose too often and missing a proposal, it's a concern. It would depend on the situation. If you see that you miss a proposal, the common culprits are that your execution node was behind you, or you're running with Infura and you had some problems with your internet, and that node needed to include a deposit. That would be a case. So this is going to be diagnosed case by case, but it's not common to lose proposals. And we know that it's not common to lose proposals because the participation rate in mainnet is almost 100%. So almost all slots are full. So we know that people are not missing proposals. Reasons to miss a proposal are your computer is too slow for some reason, like you're running on a Raspberry Pi and it's stressed the net. Just you were about to propose a block when there was an NFT drop and your Raspberry Pi couldn't take it. These kind of things happen. Flaky internet also affects this. And I can't really think of many more reasons for a proposal miss, except just that those are the main causes.
And it is always said that do not run one validator key on different machine. Is it just related to machine and nothing related to like running multiple?
It's the first thing. You would never want to run two clients at the same time. If you change your validator key from one machine to the other one, make sure that you burn and you drop your other machine out of the window and you crashed it. Make sure that those keys are no longer in that machine. As long as you're absolutely certain that your keys are in only one machine, then you're absolutely certain that you're not running two validators at the same time.
That is a very good piece of advice for new validators. Okay, one question is about debugging. Like we are doing multiple testing, right? So what are the noticeable points for debugging when something goes wrong on the client side?
That's a good question. I think I can add mine and Potuz maybe can follow up because he is like the master at debugging. So yeah, I think from my end, like I look at logs. I'm kind of old school. I'm like not fancy. Like some people on my team are super fancy. They use like debuggers. They go on. They look at this like aggregated metrics on Kibana and stuff like that. I just look at logs. Like I think just for me, just I look at logs enough. It just comes more like natural to me. So I look at all the error logs. I look at all the info logs. I basically just do control find. That's how I do it and stuff like that. A lot, and then it's also like nice. Just there's like, for example, like tooling like Beacon Chain Block Explorer out there, right? So you can use website as well. Log into their website. You search your validator ID. Then you look at like if you miss anything for the last 48 hours. If you miss something, that something may probably not be right. So just very basic level debugging and stuff. But other people do something fancy. I mean, that's probably not for me. And I'm sure Potuz probably have some other inputs on this.
Okay, so I'll continue on the line of Terence, and then I'll ask you, Pooja, a question about the question. But continuing with Terence, I can tell you how I debug that kind of problems that Terence is saying, which is the problems when we're coding. I just call Nishant and I ask him, Nishant, what's wrong with this? Nishant is the master debugger in the team, and he'll just gonna find the bug in whatever you have. If you don't have Nishant around, I think that depends a lot on the kind of problems that you're facing. There are some problems that naturally call to, like, say, run through a debugger. If you're working on a hashing library in assembly, you're gonna have to spend nights and nights on a debugger, seeing where one of the assembly instructions changed a byte that should not have changed. If you are hashing, like if you're failing spec tests, that's also the case, that you're trying to look block after block exactly at which line it failed. Other kind of problems require knowing the area of code a little bit better and knowing what kind of error happened. So most of us, I think all of us agree that the way we're doing this fake debugging is just recompiling with a lot of logs in our own code. We should probably leave those logs, but yeah. So sometimes those logging, like, they come up in our PRs, and Terence has already caught a few curses in Spanish in my PRs because I forgot to remove them. But now my question to you, when you asked about debugging, and I'm assuming that as a user asked this question, are you referring to this kind of debugging of our code, or debugging of, say, I am missing attestations and I'm losing money on Beacon Chain? How do I debug what's going on with my validator? Is that the question, or was the question that we just answered?
No, actually, you answered my question pretty well. Actually, I was curious to understand, like, in the situation of emergency, how does developer or the development team react, and how they start looking into the debugging of what went wrong? So that's nice. But if there is any piece of advice for users, like how they could debug, like what went wrong on their side, why they missed something, so that would be really nice to add on here.
I am very strongly opinionated on this, so I'll just leave my advice. First opinion, and just stop flooding our Discord servers about validator effectiveness. Effectiveness, as measured on Beacon Chain, the most famous explorer, is just completely useless. Just don't look at that measure, and just measure your effectiveness in a different way. Either look at how many votes you got correctly, or how many good head votes, target votes, and these kind of things. Validator effectiveness, it's not a good measure of validator performance. I am unaware of one number that is a good measurement of validator performance. So my advice for users that think their validator is not doing well, is look in the Explorer whether or not their validator without proposals is doing poorly compared to others. So the ranking in the Explorer is good, is a good measure. Another one, if you want to go deep, is if you're missing attestations and just randomly missing some attestations, is go and look at the block that you were supposed to attest. If that block had very little votes, it's most probably the proposer of that block that happened. You were unlucky and you had to propose in a bad block that came late for everyone. If those two things pass, namely you proposed in a block that had a lot of votes, well, then Discord server and ask and come with the logs. That's the most helpful thing to come is grab the logs of just don't come and say, I'm losing money and no description, no explanation whatsoever. Just come and say, I'm losing money and here are my logs. And if you do this, we're happy going to take a lot of time actually looking in your case because you might have found a bug.
That is super helpful. I know that the team are always eager to help validators, and Discord server sometimes gets spammed because of that. But if you come to the server, Discord server with information that are useful, will be helpful to both team and the user who is seeking for help. My next question is about the DevNets. I know the testing of merge started in summer 2021 with Rayonism, followed by Amphora, Potuz, Kiln, Kitsugi. And I think Prysm have participated in all testnet. Any specific spec change or improvement that is brought to the client since Rayonism to Kiln testnet that you would like to mention? Like you thought something else in the beginning when it was Rayonism, and when it is Kiln, it's altogether a different story.
I would say on the high level wise, like this concept of optimistic thinking was definitely pretty new to me for its, I'm not sure to others, to me since late Amphora. And it kind of took me a while to like wrap my head around it. And then in terms of implementation, that's probably the single feature, or I wouldn't say it's a feature, but yeah, the single implementation that's probably taking up most of our time in terms of implementation and testing. I mean, I'm so happy to have Potuz on board. I mean, he is doing 99% of the work there and the forward stories. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Potuz, do you have anything that's like something that's interesting?
Not really. It's a good question. No, I think Terence just nailed it. Optimistic think I think was the biggest change. We didn't really have it for Kiln. We weren't supporting it.
Well, this is also good to know, because that means the initial thought process was in the right direction and we continued building on top of that. And if I understand correctly, optimistic sync, it is not still finalized, it is still under discussion, or are we clear on that?
Oh no, so it's the spec is final. The thing is that it's optional. It's not even though I think every consensus client that is open source implements it, it's still optional.
Cool. Maybe we will have someone on the show to talk more about optimistic sync in future.
But something that you mentioned is it's important to actually stress. The original PR, it's one of the original PRs by Mikhail. I mean, there are lots of people worked on this on the first PRs on how to do the merge, and it really hasn't changed. So people say we're rushing into this, but it's a few years that the main idea of how to merge hasn't changed at all. And the only changes are in user experience, optional features, or the API of how the engine and the client and the big consensus client is communicating. But the actual way in how the merge is going to happen and how the process is going to continue after we merge has not changed in, I would say, a couple of years now.
That is incredible. Kudos to all Ethereum developers for like thinking of it and then continue working on top of that. One question related to Beacon Chain in specific. Is there any change that is being brought to Beacon Chain clients after the merge? Like, will there be a significant change in penalties or anything new that wasn't there? I know there can be minor enhancement, but anything in specific?
I will say, so I will answer this in 2 parts. The first part is user experience. So the biggest change for user experience is now that you must run an execution layer client, right? You cannot be lazy and just assuming that you will never propose, and the event you propose, there may not be a deposit, so that for your block is still valid. So you must run an execution layer client. But you have five different execution layer clients to choose for, and that's the biggest change. And then you also need to specify a fee recipient, like Potuz said, otherwise your ETH will be burned, right? And then on the implementation side, I would say just optimistic thinking is probably the best. It's probably the biggest thing that we have to do so far, just to like cover all the edge cases, because like unfortunately there's 5 different EL clients and they all kind of like do something slightly different than the other in their own good way, and there's always trade-off between them. So being compatible to every single one of them is probably the biggest challenge. Yeah,
That is nice. Yes, I remember when we were having a conversation for Altair upgrade, there was this flexibility to not run the execution plan. So now it is a must and options are available. With this Know Your Client series, we are trying to share information about both execution layer and consensus layer client. So you will probably get to know more about options other than Geth. Obviously, Geth is also there. That is also coming up with a lot of new features, but Bazel, Nethermine, and Aragon client too. So yeah, we have a lot of options for you to choose. The last testnet is going to be Goerli Prater merge, which I believe is going to be very critical with respect to specs, as that is going to be closest to the mainnet. And also the fact that Goerli and Prater both are long-running testnet. So are there any special preparations for Goerli Prater testnet merge?
I don't think so. I think what's nice is that Prater is already an existing beacon chain, so you don't have to launch another beacon chain. Our infra team, Terence and Prysm, is probably happy because we don't have to spend more money on launching more prod nodes. But yeah, so I think we just need to decide on validator merge epoch. And then after that, we have to decide on like a TTD. It's proof of authority. So yeah, it's going to be easier. You don't have to like set the TTD super high and pray that miners do not show us and then set it lower again. So I think the process will be a lot smoother. In terms of timeline, I'm not the best person for this. I will default that to Tim and Danny, so they will have to decide on that.
Awesome. Okay, my last set of questions, a couple of more questions to go. That is about the community support. I understand that Prysm may have been lucky to get support since beginning, like a lot of support. What do you think about the EF's client incentive program? Was that helpful towards Prysm and other clients as well to continue working on merge? Yeah.
For sure, definitely. I think that's definitely very like, I think the money is nice, but besides the money, I think like people in general wants to feel like rewarded, right? And like I think like that's just a very nice way to show that EF like cares like every single core dev out there. And I think that's a very, very nice thing to do, right? And then I mean, we're super lucky to be in the position that we are. So thank you, EF, for doing that. And then it also allows us to have like a very like sufficient runway to make sure that we can keep doing what we're doing for the next like 3 to 5 years. So yeah, I'm really appreciative for that.
And other than that, in terms of general community support, what can Ethereum community do to support Prysm or Prismatic Lab?
I would think just more bugs. try Prysm more. I mean, you should try all the clients. Don't try Prysm more, but you should like. I would appreciate like people just testing it and then give us feedbacks and just tell us like we suck and like which part we suck, right? I do like my biggest worry is just like everything smoothly, but post merge something happens. So like I want all the issue to happen right now and then happen really rapidly fast. And Potuz, anything that you want people to do more?
I just want to repeat what you said. I was a user. I am a user of Prysm, and one of the things that strikes me as fantastic of this community, and other clients have the same thing, is if you want something, they don't have it for it, and if it's deemed useful, they will make it quickly. It's impressive how you can get to talk to the primary core devs in essentially every serious project that I've had interactions so far. And Prysm is one of them. We're happy to take any advice. So this is one of the good things that you can actually help. Just try the software. If you find something you don't like, or if you in the documentations, you find something that you didn't understand, just come and ask us. It doesn't make any sense to, in order to use Prysm, that you're going to be reading other sources for information instead of the Prysm webpage. Our documentation portal is revamping now. We've just onboarded someone that is doing a great job in our docs, Mick, and I encourage everyone to go and read them. If you find anything that you think it's not clear, just ask for it to be changed. That's going to be very helpful for us.
Well, you partially answered my next question, which was about any advice for an aspiring node runner, for someone who wants to be an Ethereum validator. I know it's time to wrap up, but if any one of you may have final words to add for our listeners.
I just want to thank Pooja for having us here. It's such a wonderful time to just to show people that we have been working on. And yeah, just keep testing, fire bugs, and then we'll get there soon.
So if you ask about like what advice for a new validator, I would say first decide if you want to validate, because we are going to merge, but withdrawals are not implemented yet and they don't have a date. So do not think that you're going to just start staking and you're going to be able to take your ETH away immediately. That's not going to happen until withdrawals are implemented, and we do not have a date for this. Other than that, I have no advice.
We're not supposed to tell people that. Just kidding.
We hope that it's going to be fast. We hope it's going to be very fast after the merge. It doesn't look like a particularly difficult implementation, but better not to give dates.
I understand. Thank you so much for sharing this. My hope is like withdrawal will be enabled with the Shanghai upgrade, which is expected after the merge, but it may take time because there are other proposals in line to be shared with the Shanghai upgrade. Potuz and Terence, we appreciate you sharing insight on client development work and merge preparation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
On this note, thank you to everyone watching or listening to this special episode on merge. Should you have any question, leave a comment or reach us at eCathoder's Discord. Check out description for links to useful resources and guest Twitter to follow. Stay tuned for more on Know Your Client series. Keep sharing your love with Ethereum cat herders and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Cheers, everyone.